All right, let's get started. So today I'm going to be talking about inclusive co-creation and adapting, remixing, and disrupting co-creation techniques from an equity-centered perspective. So I wanted to start out with this quote: "Participatory processes can vary by the degree to which they merely display participation or seek meaningful action." So that's the crux of what we're going to be talking about today: the difference between doing co-creation to meet a requirement versus really deeply engaging with the people that you're looking to serve. So let's jump in and talk a little bit about why disrupt standard methods of co-creation and the basis for which this presentation and the project that I'll be talking about today is based in. So the starting point for my research and my work in this space was how might we improve the outcomes and experiences of co-creation sessions for both historically underinvested communities and the researchers and designers who work alongside them. So really looking at how this can be used as a community tool, as well as something that can create design outcomes for organizations. So what are some of the issues with existing methods of co-creation? Well, there's several different types of co-creation methods, but these issues tend to arise with all of them, depending on how they're used. So the first is rigid templating that is too focused on collecting data. So what this means is a lot of times co-creation sessions will be very, very structured. So you'll have a slideshow or a mural board or something like that with a series of prompts. And it will be very rigid in terms of you have to respond to this prompt and like write something down for each one. So it's not very flexible in terms of what you can talk about, what you can create, those types of things. So the second issue is kind of tied to the first one in that there's a lack of reflection and slow creation processes. So what this means is that a lot of times the sessions are very focused on collecting data quickly, working with a large group, and there isn't a lot of time for really discussing with the participant and really understanding why they created what they created, what it means to them, all of those types of questions that really make co-creation such an interesting method to use. And the third is that they aren't always adaptable for different mindsets and situations. So I already touched on this a little bit, but what I found through my research is that oftentimes co-creation is very focused on one way of working. So you might have a session where you want people to draw out wireframes or annotate a design or something like that. But if that doesn't work for that particular person, they might not feel as engaged with your session, and you're missing out on really valuable data if you opened up the ways that people can participate in the session. This is really important as well when working with people who are neurodivergent, but really anyone can benefit from a range of different ways to contribute to a co-creation session. So before I dived into research with users and actually into co-creation focused research, I conducted interviews with designers to understand how they felt about co-creation and its use. So one designer said that they felt like co-creation and co-design is a buzzword that feels very nebulous. So they didn't really know where co-creation began and other methods end, and what they could really use co-creation for besides it just being like an innovative method that they hadn't tried before. So that was really the core problem that I was looking to solve: is how can this be more meaningful both to participants and to designers and researchers? So we've talked a little bit about issues and confusion around co-creation. So what should co-creation never be? So it really shouldn't be a one-off workshop, an item on a checklist, only used a part of the process, or really, as the quote at the beginning stated, it shouldn't be just extracting outputs from users that don't influence outcomes. So you really want to make sure if you're going to host a co-creation session, to the best of your team's abilities, that you're going to leverage that feedback into meaningful change in either a product or service or some type of community change or whatever it is that you're working on. Okay, so a little bit about the research I conducted about co-creation, both primary and secondary. So I conducted research to create a toolkit for equity-centered co-creation with the goal of enabling underinvested communities to leverage co-creation for positive change. So The project started out by me originally researching how to engage communities of underrepresented artists. So that was the specific population I was focused on. And originally I thought I would create an app or some sort of other intervention, but I realized that community collaboration tools and ways to influence decision-making in these types of communities was really the main thing that I was interested in researching further. So on screen, there's a Venn diagram of all of the different areas that I researched. So on the left, I was looking at lived experiences of artists, so financial perceptions, established business skills, freelancing experience, and so on. And on the right were educational and community aspects. So looking at community and collaboration, informal learning communities, universal design for learning. And so at the intersection of all of that is co-creation for equity in communities, which is what I chose to focus my undergraduate thesis on. So the research itself was conducted with 25 plus early career artists, and it was focused on co-creation for artistic community creation. So it was really involving trialing different co-creation methods after a round of in-depth interviews to really deeply understand this group of participants. So in terms of research methods that I used, I conducted one-on-one interviews with people from a range of different backgrounds, focused on learning, education, community building, really to just get a sense of would co-creation work for these types of communities? How can it be used? What are people's needs? That type of thing. Then I did literature research. So what are current co-creation methods? Is there anything already looking at marginalized groups? There was a few, but it really wasn't as in-depth as I was hoping. And then actually conducting trial co-creation sessions with participants. So trying out different methods, frameworks, just to see what could work better for people. And then also looking at existing types of toolkits and frameworks to see the best ways that these ideas could be communicated. So with tons of synthesis later, I came out with a bunch of different learnings about co-creation and co-design. So the main thing that I found out through, especially my research with designers and my review of secondary research, is that co-creation and co-design sessions are often just viewed for gathering data. And there's nothing wrong with that inherently. We want to collect data when we're researching. It can often become a little bit exploitative when people are putting all of this time into creating ideas that then aren't used, and they don't have control over those ideas anymore either. So really the issue here is that a lot of times even organizations and designers didn't know how to use co-creation for anything else, or didn't even realize that this was an issue. So with my toolkit, the goal is to demonstrate these methodologies' impact in shared learning and community building for these diverse communities. So let's chat a little bit about learning through doing. So how I developed these co-creation improvements. So on screen are some samples of outputs from users. So one of them is showing different drawings and thoughts in response to a prompt about COVID and being an artist. And on the right is someone who wrote out a bunch of different ideas. So just showing some of the different ways that users might respond to the exact same prompt. So this was really something that struck me as interesting, is that even when the constraints are very narrow, everybody will think about the prompts very differently, which might seem obvious, but you wouldn't expect necessarily this huge range of responses that you get back from people, and even the ways that different people use the tools. And then secondary to this, I was really looking at the area of building psychological safety. So taking careful preparation and having a deep knowledge of the community you're working with is really important for this, because you want people to feel safe in the sessions. And if you're able to kind of resonate with them and what they are feeling and thinking, it's a lot easier to do that. So kind of taking yourself out of the researcher shoes and into the collaborator shoes is really important here. So on the right is an example of where someone opened up, kind of stating that when they are participating in a community, they're really excited to see people like them. So this particular person had expressed that in current communities and community engagements, they really didn't see a lot of people like them. So allowing for a flexible and creative environment breeds new insights and more value for your participants. So if you open up the floor for participants to explore and create what they want, you're more likely to get authentic outputs and really something that's both meaningful to your team and to your participants. So here, there's one example of where a user both wrote and drew different things to express their idea. And as well as this, they were narrating to me what they were drawing and doing as they worked. So having all of these different ways of inputting information is really important. Some users might only write, some might only draw, but you'll get the inputs that feel most comfortable to them, which generally does result in better ideas and insights. So kind of again, don't restrict the outputs and responses from your users. So again, just more different ways of participating. So what are some different barriers that might arise when bringing participants into co-creation sessions? So I did find that depending on the population that I was working with, a lot of people did feel very uncomfortable or even alienated when participating in co-creation. So a lot of times it can be very intimidating for people. And it's really important to think about as a researcher or a designer, how your session might be scary to someone. So it can be really scary to put yourself out there, to express ideas to someone you don't know, all of those different things, especially if you come from a different background or kind of space than your participant does. So yeah, I found a lot of participants did find these community intervention methods using co-creation to be a bit intimidating at first. Additionally, something that can also kind of heighten that anxiety around co-creation is that participants can often be hesitant to provide input on existing concepts or prototypes. So a lot of times co-creation will involve looking at something that the company has already come up with or giving feedback on concepts and creating your own concepts from that. But I found that users often prefer to start with a blank slate rather than give input on ideas. And you also tend to not get as genuine of feedback with these types of methods, since people understandably are a bit nervous to give negative feedback on something that they think you have worked hard on. It's not to say you can't do it, but just be aware that existing concepts and prototypes do tend to be more limiting compared to letting users kind of create their own concepts. So then another additional thing I found was that having a dialogue about each question and its purpose often helps the participant feel more at ease. So I think all of us can kind of relate to the idea that when we have more information about why we're giving out information or why a certain question is being asked, we're probably more likely to answer it and to feel comfortable giving a genuine answer. So you really want to put people at ease here. So if you're asking something really personal about someone's lived experience of racism or something like that, and you're asking them what would make that better for them in a situation, what could remedy that, you want to be really sensitive to that someone might not feel comfortable answering those kinds of questions if they don't know why you're asking them and what is going to come out of them. So just being really transparent about all of that, especially during the consent process. And then jumping into some of the challenges of remote. So one thing that I found conducting this research during COVID is that, and I'm sure lots of you have observed this too in your own research and design processes, is it can be very challenging to engage with people through a remote environment. So interviews are pretty straightforward. You know, you can do them over the phone or on Zoom. But doing research where it involves co-creation, it involves tools that users might not be familiar with, is a lot more complex in a remote format. So on screen, there is this image of one user's inputs where they only really felt comfortable filling out one sticky note, and this was actually assisted as well. So it was a challenge with some users to help them navigate tools like Miro and be able to contribute in the way that they wanted to. So it wasn't that they didn't want to participate, it was just genuinely challenging to use the tools. So roadblocks were really apparent when working within the online medium for interacting with my participant group. So a lot of times tools would only work on desktop and the participant only had a phone, or their internet connection was spotty and we had to work around that. So just being prepared for all of those different challenges that might arise. You don't want to inadvertently exclude someone from your research by only working in Mural, for instance, or only working in Mural, since those tools do require a higher level of technical capability, internet connection, comfort level, so on and so forth. So some great alternatives for that are working in tools like Google Slides to put sticky notes on and draw things, Google Jamboard, lots of different tools. And then you can also work on paper. So one tactic that I realized was a good thing to do in these situations was have participants draw it out on a piece of paper and then photograph it and upload it. Or alternatively, they can dictate responses to you or things like that. So just finding all of these different creative ways to work around the challenges of remote is really important if you're conducting a remote session. Okay, so jumping into the toolkit itself and some final takeaways. So what was the outcome of all this research? A toolkit. So looking inside the toolkit, there is a series of modules to help people get started with inclusive co-creation. So it involves a description of each module. On screen here, the introduction to module 1 is it has a paragraph intro, definition of terms, a guide to getting started. So there's 3 total modules like that. And then there is also a case study, including the before and after of the application of inclusive methods, which is shown on screen here. So there's modules with tactics to try out, from warm-ups to methods of dialogue, as well as the case study of my own research, showing quotes from users, as well as quotes from secondary research that I conducted. So this toolkit is designed to be a quick start guide to help you design your sessions. It also has templates that you can feel free to remix and reuse for your own purposes. So all of those different things should help you get started with your journey with inclusive co-creation. So reflecting a little bit on the project, this was a big pivot for me from my typical product design and more traditional user research work, but I'm really excited to have done it and to keep working on it. I'm still learning all the time. This is still a very emerging space and there's lots to learn and try out. And I encourage you to experiment as well and to try out new things and just set up new methods and really experiment and find out what works best for the particular population that you're working with. So if you want to download the toolkit and explore it further, you can go to Colens, COLENS.design for the downloadable toolkit, worksheets, and more information. The full toolkit is available completely for free to download, as well as other resources on the website. So definitely feel free to check that out and use it in your projects. All right, so thank you so much for listening. I hope you took something away from this that can help you in your own work. I'd love to hear any comments or questions and anyone else who's tried out inclusive co-creation techniques. So you can connect with me on Twitter at Kate_Matisic, MATESIC, and then katematisic.com, or by email at hello@katematisic.com. So I'd love to hear from you, and I'm looking forward to hearing the rest of the presentations at the conference.